When he learns that he has the chance to regain his freedom, an ex-convict with special abilities decides to join a team of superheroes whose mission is to prevent the planet from being taken over by alien insects. Today we're going to recap the story of the series, Peacemaker, from 2022. Christopher Smith is a man who, since childhood, has been trained by his father to eliminate people. Despite his violent nature, Chris fights for peace and believes he must achieve it at any cost. During their last duel, the man was shot in the neck and a building fell on top of him. Even so, Chris managed to survive and his only injury was a broken collarbone. After being discharged, he picks up his belongings and leaves the hospital. When he manages to get into a cab and drive off, Chris celebrates the fact that he hasn't been arrested, having committed several crimes while working as a peacemaker. When he gets home, he realizes that he doesn't have his key because he spent the last 4 years in prison, so he has to break the window to get into the trailer. Minutes later, some ARGUS agents show up and Chris realizes he's in trouble. The truth is that he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for eliminating Rick Flag in Suicide Squad, but has only served 15% of his sentence. So Clemson Mern decides to try to negotiate with him and claims that if the Peacemaker agrees to join his team on a secret mission, he will gain his longed-for freedom. Since he doesn't want to go back to jail, he decides to join Clemson because he knows it's his best chance to get a clean slate again. That afternoon, Chris goes to visit his father and is recognized by his neighbor. Although he considers himself a great superhero, the Peacemaker is not well liked by the citizens and most of them consider him a real villain. After arguing with the old man, Chris enters the house and does everything he can to get his father's attention, but Augie shows no concern for his son during his time in prison. When he sees Eagly, his pet eagle, Chris realizes that the animal is the only one who has really missed him and is moved to tears. After dinner, he goes to his father's laboratory to choose a new helmet and then meets his team in a restaurant. When he realizes that his colleague is wearing his superhero uniform, Clemson and the others start making fun of him, but Chris ignores them. After dinner, the man returns home with his pet eagle and, on the way, spots Amelia entering a bar. He immediately turns around and enters the establishment to find her. At that moment, Chris sees the woman beating up a guy who was harassing her and is completely smitten. However, after drinking her beer, Amelia leaves and leaves her colleague alone, as she is tired of dealing with self-interested men. That night, Chris meets Annie and manages to go home with her. After a night together, he is attacked with a knife and beaten to a pulp while trying to free himself from the woman's clutches. When Chris realizes that she is no ordinary human, he has no choice but to run out of the window and ends up hurting himself when he falls to the ground. Slowly, the Peacemaker crawls into the car and manages to get his helmet. Just as he is about to be attacked, he activates the sonic boom and Annie's body is torn apart along with all the surrounding cars. Luckily, Eagly had gone out hunting and managed to stay safe during the explosion. When he hears the sound of approaching cars, Chris calls Amelia and asks for a ride to get away from the crime scene. After putting on his uniform, the Peacemaker cleans out the mutant's apartment and decides to take some CDs, since the woman will no longer be able to use them. As the building is surrounded by police, the superhero has no choice but to break into an apartment and jump out of the window. Slowly, the Peacemaker makes his way down all the floors and comes out even more bruised each time he decides to jump. When she realizes that he is surrounded, Amelia gets out of the car and uses tranquilizer darts to put out the police officers. At this point, Chris finds a loophole to escape and, when he and Eagly get into the car, Letta drives away from the scene of the crime. Seeing the suspect running away, the police start shooting, but luckily the group is not hit by any shots. When the rest of the team meets up, Clemson and the others begin to think of a plausible reason to justify the mutants' attack and begin to speculate that Amanda Waller, the woman who formed that team, is trying to eliminate them. What none of them realize is that Amanda is Letta's mother and would never put her daughter's life at risk for the sake of a mission. During the discussion, Chris remembers that he caught Annie reading his dossier while he was using the bathroom, and it was then that the woman discovered that he works for the Butterfly Project, which was created to exterminate creatures like her. That afternoon, on his way home, Chris receives a visit from an old friend called Vigilante, and the anti-hero manages to convince him to take a walk in the woods to train his skills. While the pair shoot hundreds of targets for fun, Augie is arrested on suspicion of eliminating Annie because John, a member of Chris's team, spread false clues so that the Peacemaker wouldn't be associated with the site of the explosion. Instead, Augie, who has also committed several crimes, was used as a scapegoat and ended up being arrested instead of his son. Upon arriving at the jail, the old man meets several of his former followers, who are still willing to follow their leader, known as the White Dragon. A few days later, Chris and his team have to carry out their first mission, which consists of eliminating Senator Royland Goff, who is a mutant. There are suspicions that the senator's wife and children are also butterflies, so the group will have to investigate to find out if this information is true. If this is the case, the whole family will have to be eliminated. While the rest of the team is inside the van, Amelia and Chris are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to execute the elimination order. However, when he arrives home, Goff is escorted to the door by his driver and his personal security guard, so Chris doesn't have the chance to shoot. So the group has to wait for the next opportunity, and Chris discovers that he has been followed by the vigilante all this time. Since he can't risk ruining the mission, Clemson allows the young man to join his agents on the run, and over dinner, Chris and Amelia confirm that the whole family is made up of mutants. At this point, the Peacemaker is ordered to exterminate them all, but he is reluctant to do so because he doesn't think it's right to eliminate defenseless children. When he realizes that his friend won't be able to carry out the mission, the vigilante decides to help him and quickly eliminates the mother and the 2 children. However, just as he is about to shoot the senator, Judo Master appears and single-handedly manages to get rid of the 3 combat-trained agents. Despite his short stature, the bodyguard is a ninja with extreme martial arts skills and manages to defeat his opponents without the aid of any weapons. The driver then appears to help Judo Master contain the invaders, but ends up being surprised by the arrival of Letta. When she realizes that the guy isn't a butterfly, the agent refuses to shoot, so Amelia has to do the job because she can't risk the guy revealing the identity of her team members to the police. Meanwhile, the Peacemaker and the vigilante have been taken into the house and are tied up. Determined to rescue their team member, Clemson and the others break into the mansion and walk carefully towards the signal sent by Chris's helmet. When Goff shows up, he orders Judo Master to find the other mutants and tell them everything that happened that night. While Clemson and his team try to figure out how to get into the basement, the senator attacks the vigilante in an attempt to extract information from the Peacemaker. However, when his team blows up the front door, Chris manages to escape and starts a duel against the senator. He then runs to get Goff's shotgun and uses his own weapon to eliminate him. Meanwhile, John, who remains in the van, sees Judo Master fleeing in a vehicle and causes an accident to prevent the little guy from escaping. Looking inside the car, the agent realizes that Judo Master has managed to get out and finds him crawling on the ground. So John has no choice but to attack him with a crowbar. During the attack session, Goff removes the vigilante's mask and Chris finally discovers his identity. The anti-hero's real name is Adrian, and he is the brother of an old friend of Chris. After the senator's elimination, a frightening insect comes out of his head and the Peacemaker discovers the real reason why mutants are called butterflies. Instead of eliminating it, Chris took the alien butterfly home and trapped it in a glass jar. Of all the people in the forest, Judo Master was the only survivor, and the team intends to use him to find other butterflies. The next morning, Chris hitches a ride with Adrian and goes to visit his father. When he realizes Augie isn't there, he breaks into his quantum deployment warehouse and steals all the helmets. At that moment, the Peacemaker comes across his father's costume. Adrian then appears and discovers that Augie was the White Dragon. On his way out of the house, Chris runs into his neighbor and discovers that his father was arrested a few days ago. Furious, the Peacemaker decides to go to the police station and tell him the truth. During a brief conversation with his father, Chris reveals that it was his team who changed the fingerprints and incriminated Augie without his knowledge. When he discovers that he is being held in place of his son, the man is furious and claims that he was right about Chris. The truth is that Augie never loved him and always preferred that his youngest son hadn't been born. Before returning to his cell, Augie says that the first chance he gets, he will tell the detectives the whole truth and Chris will be arrested. On leaving the police station, Chris returns home with Letta, and the woman receives a phone call from John, who has just discovered that Judo Master has managed to escape. At that moment, he is attacked by the ninja and, minutes later, Letta and Chris appear. While the woman helps John recover, the Peacemaker goes out to find the little guy and the two start a duel. During the fight, when Chris was about to beat Judo Master, Letta appeared and knocked him down with a shot. In the morning, during a meeting with Clemson, the team discovers that the butterflies are extraterrestrial creatures that invade human bodies and take control of them. Infected people acquire superhuman strength and become very dangerous, but they can only feed on a viscous liquid that is distributed by an industry called Gland Thai. So, that afternoon, the team is sent to investigate the activities of this company. Meanwhile, Augie gets a chance to talk to the detectives who arrested him and reveals that he was framed by his son. Faced with these allegations, Sophie and Larry decide to compare the inmate's fingerprints with those found at the crime scene and discover that he is telling the truth. Breaking into the company in the company of Letta, Chris activates his helmet's X-ray vision to check for people with butterflies on the brain and eliminates all the mutants he meets along the way. At that moment, Amelia and the vigilante are at the factory to find out how the goo that the butterflies eat is produced, and they end up being spotted. They quickly have to flee and lock themselves in a room to avoid being caught, as they are outnumbered. When they discover that their friends are in danger, Letta and Chris go to meet them, and the Peacemaker throws a grenade to wipe out all the butterflies at once. Upon entering the computer room, the pair come across a gorilla and join the rest of the team to take it down. When the battle seemed lost, John appeared with a chainsaw and finished the job, cutting the primate in half. Meanwhile, at the police station, a new captain is sent to take charge, and Sophie is informed that Augie will not be released. When she goes to question her superior, the woman discovers that the inmates' fingerprints have been sent back to forensics, and Locke claims that they are the same as those found at the crime scene. After convincing the detective to close the case, Locke calls Clemson and says the job is done. That evening, when all his colleagues have gone home, Letta returns to the office and realizes that Chris has forgotten his helmet. So she decides to test him and activates her X-ray vision. However, when she looks at Clemson, the agent is in for quite a surprise when she discovers that he is a mutant. Immediately, the woman has to flee, as she is being chased by her boss. However, during her escape, she ends up getting caught and, to her surprise, Clemson doesn't attack her. Then Amelia appears and reveals that she also knew that her boss is a butterfly. When she realized that Clemson had more information about these creatures than anyone else, the woman became suspicious of him and decided to confront him. At this point, the man explains that his species came to Earth because their home planet had become uninhabitable, so his people decided to re-establish themselves on that world. However, after a while living with the humans, the butterfly that lived in Goff's brain decided to start a revolution and convinced all his people that they should take over the planet. When he discovered the plan of the other beings of his species, Clemson refused to help them and invaded that man's body, because he was the worst person he could find. Before he was infected, his host was a criminal, and the alien chose him because he needed a human body if he wanted to stop the other butterflies. In addition to Amelia and Letta, John also already knows this information, but Amanda has no idea that the leader of one of her teams is a mutant. In the morning, Augie manages to get out of prison, and Locke goes to confront Detective Sophie. At this point, he discovers that the woman has taken the evidence to a judge who, upon analyzing it, has cleared Augie of all charges. What's more, she has obtained an arrest warrant for the Peacemaker and rallies her troops to go after him. When Chris and Adrian see the police coming to their trailer, they hide on the roof. They then climb a tree to try and escape through the forest. At that moment, Adrian becomes unbalanced and falls to the ground. The young man was carrying the butterfly that lived on Goff's body, but it managed to escape with the fall. Immediately, the insect flies towards Sophie and invades her body. Just then, other policemen appear and the two friends have to flee. They are being chased by the police army and receive Eagle's help to get rid of all the agents trying to capture them. However, just as Chris ends up being surrounded, Locke appears and eliminates all the policemen so that the pair can escape. Suddenly, Sophie gets up and gets into the car, saying she needs to meet some friends. At that moment, Larry realizes that his partner is different, but he has no idea that she is being controlled by an alien butterfly. When he meets with his team, Chris reveals that the butterfly that was removed from Goff's brain has escaped and invaded the body of a policewoman. That night, Sophie meets hundreds of butterflies that have just arrived on planet Earth and guides them to the police station so that they can invade the policemen's bodies. As a result, all the officers turn into mutants, even Locke, who was sent by Clemson to keep an eye on the employees. Eventually, the remaining butterflies invade the inmates' bodies and they all become Sophie's soldiers, who have been infected by the queen butterfly. Now that Captain Locke has become a mutant, he decides to use his influence to give an interview to the press and orders all the police in the country to unite to arrest the Peacemaker. When he finds out that he is being sought, Chris asks Adrian and John to help him destroy the butterfly's food source, as he knows that this will enable him to defeat them. During the journey, the van they are in is invaded by Augie, who is dressed as the White Dragon and claims that he went there to eliminate Chris. The old man then shoots his own son and, in trying to help him, the vigilante ends up being seriously wounded. At that moment, Chris and John run into the forest and have a chance to hide. Meanwhile, Sophie and a group of police raid Clemson's apartment and the man orders his team to flee. After being shot several times, the butterfly living in Clemson's brain tries to escape, but is crushed by Sophie. As soon as the policemen leave, Amelia runs to find her friend and has the chance to say goodbye to the butterfly. Just then, Judo Master appears and starts a duel against Amelia. The woman was about to be defeated when Letta approached and used a stun gun to erase the ninja. After losing his father and the members of his team, Chris gets into the car that the vigilante stole and continues his mission. However, in the middle of the journey, Adrian has to stop to relieve himself and the Peacemaker ends up being found by his father. While John hides, eagerly helps his companion fight against his opponents in the battle, but ends up being hit by Augie. Seeing his best friend on the ground, Chris is furious and goes after his father. However, when in possession of his suit, the White Dragon becomes extremely powerful and manages to take down the Peacemaker. Then, just as the villain was about to eliminate him, Vigilante attacks him and John appears with a gun to eliminate all of Augie's followers. Immediately, Chris gets up and attacks his father, who has always mistreated him since he was a child. It was Augie's fault that the Peacemaker took out his older brother during a fight, because their father forced them to fight and Keith had a seizure after being hit by a punch. Determined to eliminate the man, Chris grabs a gun and shoots his father in the head. Immediately afterwards, he falls to his knees and begins to cry, because despite everything, he has never been able to hate him. Realizing that Eagly is unconscious, Chris immediately takes him to a veterinary clinic and, minutes later, Amelia and Letta show up. When the eagle recovers, the group decides to continue their mission. Although they can survive in human bodies, butterflies need a specific type of food. Therefore, they brought from their planet a creature capable of producing the viscous liquid that serves as a source of nutrients. This animal lives in a cave under a farm barn, so the mission of the Peacemaker and his team is to break into this place and eliminate the creature. This way, the butterflies will run out of food and won't be able to survive for more than a week. Upon arriving at the farm, Chris attacks one of the guards and steals his clothes so that John can enter the barn in disguise. The plan consists of carrying the explosive helmet in a bag and leaving it inside the barn so that Letta can then activate the device by voice command. However, on seeing the giant caterpillar being milked inside the barn, John abandons his bag on the stairs and, as he walks back into the forest, one of the mutants realizes that he is a human undercover. Immediately, John has to run and is chased by the butterflies. Seeing her friend in danger, Letta gets so scared that she loses the voice command device and can't trigger the sonic boom. Then, when John is captured, she manages to take back control and gives the command to activate the explosion. When they realize that the warehouse is under attack, the mutants leave the human behind and run to check that the caterpillar is all right. Just then, another explosion occurs and countless butterflies are wiped out. However, as the helmet is not inside the cave, even after the warehouse has been destroyed, the creature is still alive, so Chris, Adrian and Amelia have to go there to finish the job. On the way, they face dozens of extremely strong mutants who are willing to sacrifice their lives to protect their food source. While his friends try to keep the butterflies away from the cave, Chris goes after Sophie and ends up being buried by a large amount of rubble. At that moment, Adrian and Amelia are hit by gunfire and are left totally vulnerable. When he realizes that his colleagues are wounded, Letta decides to come out of her hiding place in the forest and uses 2 pistols to finish off her enemies. While trying to follow her, John takes a tumble and breaks his foot, so the woman has to get rid of all the mutants by herself and manages to arrive in time to stop a butterfly from invading Amelia's brain. Minutes later, John approaches Letta and hands her one of the Peacemaker helmets so she can help Chris. After climbing out from under the rubble, the superhero starts a hand-to-hand fight with Sophie, but the woman says she doesn't want to hurt him. She then asks Chris to accompany her and reveals the real reason for the revolution. Sophie explains that when her people arrived on Earth, they never wanted to take power. The aim was to live peacefully, since the planet provided them with all the resources they needed, except food. However, when he observed humans, his species realized that they were making the same mistakes as his people, taking actions that prioritized profit over survival. According to Sophie, if the human race continues to do this, the Earth will suffer the same fate as her planet and will soon become a completely uninhabitable place. To prevent this from happening, his people made a promise that they would do everything in their power to change the future of humanity, even if it meant sacrificing countless lives. However, Clemson did not agree with these methods, as he felt that his people had no right to impose their will on humans. Sophie then asks Chris to fulfill his mission as Peacemaker and help her save the planet. But instead of doing that, Chris activates Letta's helmet and eliminates the giant caterpillar. He then shoots Locke and Sophie. After defeating the butterflies, the 2 friends return to the surface and Chris carries Amelia in his arms, as she is unconscious. At that moment, the Justice League appears under orders from Amanda Waller, but the Peacemaker orders them to leave, as his team has already done all the work. When they arrive at the hospital, Amelia and Adrian are seen and the rest of the team is waiting in the waiting room. When they are alone, Letta questions why Chris has chosen not to help the butterflies and the Peacemaker says that humans should have the freedom to make their own choices. Over the next few days, each member of the team returns to their normal lives. While Amelia tries to recover from being shot, Adrian escapes from hospital and John returns to work in the office. Finally, Letta can move back in with her wife and dogs while Chris returns to his trailer, where he lives with Eagly and the butterfly that escaped from Sophie's body after his wife's elimination. Just as he began to believe that he was getting rid of his past traumas, Chris realizes that the ghost of his father is following him and now he has to find a way to live with the guilt of having eliminated him. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.